My name is Delaney Hines. Pronouns are he, him. I serve as a co-chair for the planning committee for this year's summit, alongside as I'm also the chair for the education committee, and I'm also a member of the board of directors, and you'll see a number of members of the board of directors here today. Thank you to all of you that had a hand to play in pulling this together. My co-chair, Dr. Rabina Simpson, is right now very, what's the word? Meaningfully spending some time with family. She's enjoying a vacation, which is much long overdue. So she's unable to be here with us physically, but she's here in thought. So I just want to make sure I shared a bit of a note to say that she's had a huge hand to play in helping to pull this summit together alongside many members who are here. Few things. We're going to kick today off with a land acknowledgement, followed by some housekeeping, a bit of a recap of day one, and then looking ahead to day two, and also the industry symposium that's taking place at the close of the summit. So, the land in which we're currently on and we're currently joining and convening on is the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Attawandarak, and the Mississaugas of New Credit in the territory covered by Treaty 13. It's interesting because many a time when I deliver a land acknowledgement, I like to place myself physically where I am, but especially for this joyous occasion, it's so fantastic to finally be able to convene with you all in person. We've been having so many of our conventions online these last few years. This is our first summit since 2018. Zoraida and I had a great chat this morning just about the palpable feeling you have being able to convene in person, share stories, really feel the sentiment of the emotions that are being shared and translated to us. And I just think it's so fantastic that we've been able to do so much already in one day by virtue of all the sessions, all the knowledge that's been translated, all the insights that have been shared, and just the gathering in itself has been a really great experience. And I'm just so thankful that many of you are here to join us again on day two. And for those of you where you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. You're in for a treat. So stay tuned because there's a lot of great insight, great stories, great jokes, and a lot of community and bonding that's going to happen throughout the day. So I want to also mention parking. Very important. Nice segue, right? So for those of you who haven't or have not already, please be sure to find one of these postings in and around the foyer and the reception table there. It's important that you scan this QR code and register your vehicles. That way you won't be charged for parking. I have to say, if you've already paid for parking by way of one of the meters that's in front of your vehicle, unfortunately we can't do anything at that point. So it's imperative that you scan the QR code, register your vehicle, and we'll be able to provide you with complimentary parking. Also, throughout the course of the day, I do ask that folks please remember to keep your phones on silent. We had one GPS that tried to participate and it didn't register yesterday. So I don't want to have to kick anybody out. So I just ask that you folks please do keep your phones on silent, vibrate. I know there's important things you're missing right now, but just to ensure we respect the time and energy our folks put into their presentations, it'd be great if we can have your undivided attention. Oh, but the one thing you can pull your cell phones out for is social media. So if you're posting anything on Twitter, Instagram, sharing stories, feel free. Snap away, take as many pictures as possible, as much tweets as you can. We want to build as much engagement for those who aren't able to be here physically. Okay, so in terms of recap, yesterday was hard to put into words, honestly. I mentioned it a bit before, just a palpable feeling. I heard from people talking about the need for comprehensive care. We heard about the importance of advocacy. We got introduced to novel therapies and CRISPR genes. But the one, I think, singular thread that really made me so happy was just the community and sense of safety we were able to provide for folks. We were all able to be here with a shared purpose, a shared understanding, a shared commitment, and throughout the entire day, that continued to resonate over and over again throughout all the talks. And so many people took away so many insights and questions that we can continue to unpack and approach in the days to come. And I think that today will be just like that. I'm sure you're all committed to the exact same outcome, and I look forward to seeing folks also have that same takeaway that I did at the close of today. Today we're going to have a much more communal feel. So we're going to have, not to say we have less clinical focus, but we're going to really spend some time ensuring the families who've been able to join us today have an understanding of the different work we're doing at SCAGO, the different work happening in and amongst our stakeholders and happening in the community at large, looking to make sure we can build awareness and also promote some of these initiatives and bringing these therapies to people in a way that's accessible and equitable. So we're going to hear from many of my colleagues in terms of the patient-centric clinical trials. We're going to hear more about just the different transfusions medicine that's taking place in sickle cell disease, alongside strategies for effective patient engagement and parenting of children living with sickle cell disease. So I just hope you're all looking forward to a very, very awe-inspiring day. A lot of insight, like I mentioned before, and a lot of knowledge will be translated. And then at the close of the summit, the moment you've all been waiting for, we're going to be having a draw for 5 $200 cash prizes for those who registered early. So I want to be very clear. We're not giving each person 5 $200 cash prizes, okay? There's only 5 individual cash prizes of $200. So long as you registered according to the actual instructions, we'll be making sure to relay the instructions when the draw happens again, but please do stay to the very end to ensure that if you had made the qualifications, you could be entered into that draw. Then following the draw, we'll be having our Industry Alliance Symposium, which will be taking place in the Alderwood Room, which is immediately adjacent to the registration desk. And that's going to be another great conversation where our industry partners, patient advocates, and our clinician partners can talk a bit more again about the different kind of new and innovative things happening from the industry in terms of bringing some innovative therapies to the people. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of talking, and I don't want to delay us any further. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator for our first plenary session. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Suzan Williams to the podium.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the 4th annual Sickle Cell Summit. My name is Suzan Williams. I'm a pediatric hematologist, oncologist. I practice at SickKids in Toronto. And I would like to welcome you all to this plenary session on how to achieve patient-centric clinical trials. So our first speaker on the agenda is Lance Archer. Lance is a patient advocate board member for SCAGO. He lives with sickle cell disease and is very passionate about improving the quality of life of patients with the disease. He's a member of the board of directors for the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario and the past chair of the SCAGO's Patient Advisory and Advocacy Council. He's a clinical psychologist, candidate with a research interest in health psychology, specifically treatment adherence, and he aspires to develop psychological interventions to improve health-related quality of life in individuals with chronic disease, including sickle cell disease. So please welcome Lance Archer to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. All right. Thank you, Dr. Williams, and it's a pleasure to be here to share this moment with the Sickle Cell Awareness Group of Ontario as we talk about something that's really important to me, sickle cell disease, and how we can work collaboratively to get patients well supported so that we can improve their quality of life. I will be talking today about the importance of collaborations with patient community in clinical trials. And so we know that people living with sickle cell disease and even other inherited blood disorders generally experience poor quality of life. And depending on sociodemographic factors such as their race, their gender, ethnicity, and even their economic status, their degree of wellness may be compromised. And while we acknowledge and applaud the interest of the pharmaceutical industry in advancing treatment, we cannot ignore that oftentimes there is a misalignment between clinical research activity and patient needs. So it's not uncommon to hear that chief investigators are pursuing an agenda that does not always support the immediate or the most pressing concerns of patients. And for this reason, we can expect that a misalignment in the agenda and even the needs may perpetuate this sense of mistrust in clinical trials, and it may be manifested through low recruitment and retention rates. And so, for that reason, I submit to you that collaborating with patient communities in clinical trials is important. Doesn't just benefit one, but it benefits all. So speaking of benefits, perhaps what we could consider to be the greatest benefit is that collaboration brings about more patient-focused research. We know that when there's greater involvement, we can expect there to be less challenges faced in conducting clinical trials. We can expect that there will be improved patient satisfaction with clinical trials, and that this will in turn aid in the development of new medicines that meet patients' needs and their expectations. Further benefits include, just the identification of the unmet needs, determining the impact of new treatments and facilitating adherence, and improving trial designs so that we can enhance recruitment and retention. Transparency is another major benefit because this establishes trust and it sustains a meaningful collaboration. So collaborating has these benefits, but now let's talk a little bit about the importance of collaborating. You see, when we collaborate with patient communities, we see that we are more likely to effectively increase racial and ethnic minority participation in trials. And this in turn impacts how we assess health disparities and lead to more valuable research data. Studies have shown that participants identifying as Blacks in particular, they have more negative beliefs about medicines, and they are less trusting of the medical profession than non-Blacks. And so we can also expect that collaborating helps to facilitate transparency that's needed to contribute to trust in clinical trials. You see, this collaboration, it requires that research projects be built from the bottom up, starting with the community members to identify salient issues, the most pressing issues that are important to the community, rather than from the top-down approach where researchers are identifying an agenda that may not necessarily reflect the community needs. You see, the bottom-up approach can improve population's participation, their enthusiasm for this intervention. Community-based participatory research theory suggests that engaging community members as collaborators in health disparity research is powerful on many levels. It eliminates health disparities, it improves enthusiasm, and it yields more valuable data. So the best way to start this collaborative process is to consider using the bottom-up approach rather than the top-down approach. Bottom-down sees us having more patient involvement. In addition to increase in recruitment, there is also an increase in retention. Collaboration with patient communities helps us to achieve this because it provides opportunities for us to share more information that can maintain this partnership and maintain this interest. and also to increase research literacy. So many patients at times may not necessarily understand what is a clinical trial, what are the steps involved in all of that. They may not be familiar with the process. And so when we collaborate with them, it gives us an opportunity to share that knowledge. Successful retention of minority participants require active involvement of existing community partners. So collaboration also increases generalizability. With increased collaboration, we can expect there to be the ability for us to transfer this information to the wider community. We know that in many cases, gender and racial groups may present with conditions differently, and they may respond differently to treatment. For example, research suggests that sex-related differences in sickle cell disease, morbidity, and mortality exist. So male gender in particular, they seem to have more of an aggressive disease course than females. They suffer more severe complications. White patients with sickle cell disease are known to have less sickle cell crises and less acute chest syndrome and require less blood transfusion compared to blacks. We also know that elderly patients who are usually left out of clinical trials, they are much of the data that is gathered around younger patients may not directly be applicable to the treatment of the elderly. And so diversity in clinical trials is vital to ensuring a cross-cultural representation and ultimately increase this generalizability and transportability that we desire. A lack of diversity in clinical trials is not just a scientific issue, but is also a moral issue. And for this reason, I submit to you that inclusion of diverse participants in clinical trials may lead to more robust and complete data that can broaden our understanding of the differences in treatment responses. And it is through patient collaboration or even community collaboration that we find ourselves getting a greater sense of the needs of the community and making room for diversity in clinical trials. So in addition to increased participation, increased retention, and increased generalizability, we know that collaboration minimizes this mismatch, which I spoke about earlier, that we can see that there's often a mismatch between what patients desire and even clinicians, what they desire, versus what research is the developers are focusing on. And we can expect that when this happens, there is likely to be less interest in participating in clinical trials. Studies have shown that this mismatch can be as subtle as some research questions that researchers are interested in, they do not necessarily match what the patients desire. For example, some of the questions thought of by the team, the research team may not necessarily be, let me say that again, I'm sorry. Some of the interest and some of the questions that patients may have about clinical trials, about treatment, they may not always be thought of by developers as well. So it's important that we are collaborating so that we can prioritize what patients need so that future users of our medicines can be helped more effectively. So in conclusion, in light of the benefits of collaborating with patient communities, developers of clinical research or clinical trials are encouraged to consider the value of collaborating. One, it increases participation and retention. it really helps us to be able to measure health disparities and to test the generalizability of effective interventions. It also helps to improve patient satisfaction, and it captures a more diverse sample, thereby leading to more robust and complete data to broaden the understanding of racial and ethnic differences in treatment responses. Thank you.
We're going to, of course, hold questions till the end of the session. So thank you very much, Lance. And we'll introduce our next speaker, Ms. Kuaban, who's the Deputy Director of Scientific Affairs at the American Society of Hematology. She has a background in biochemistry and a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She leads ASH's strategic initiatives focused on clinical trials, emerging gene and cell therapies, and invited scientific conflict for the Society's annual meeting. Can I welcome Ms. Kuaban to the podium, please?
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and to the organizers for inviting me to speak to you all today. Thank you. So as the title of my presentation states, I will be talking to you all about how to implement DEI in clinical trials throughout the life cycle of that process, and specifically sharing how ASH has been thinking about this particular issue. So I think my colleague who presented before me really laid out the foundation here, but what I would like to say is, why is DEI important? I think for me, that is sort of like the foundation of why we're doing this work. It is important because, it builds trust in research, as you heard earlier. It promotes fairness, and it ensures that study designs, and more importantly, the therapeutics that come out of those studies are generalizable. I think patients take comfort in knowing that if a study was done in a population that engaged people that look like them, or was developed, led to a therapeutic that is going to apply to people that look like them, I think there's comfort in that. So we really want to ensure that we are thinking about that in that context. And also DEI in clinical trials helps to advance scientific knowledge and drives innovation. So to ensure that trials are diverse, you really need to go back, at least in my humble opinion, go back to the basics and really determine what's the problem you're trying to solve. For ASH, that problem was really ensuring that all hematology clinical trials are reflective of the epidemiology of the disease, and ensuring that patients who are likely to benefit from these therapeutics were included in those studies. ASH has a commitment to DEI dating back 20 plus years, and so this was really something that we felt was important to take on. Need to kind of think through how to move my slides. Can you advance my slides for me, please? Thank you. So since our constituency is really predominantly researchers and practitioners, to address this challenge, the approach we really took was to create practical educational resources, so emphasis on the term practical here, for our blood scientists and our practitioners. So for them, it was really a matter of how can we make sure that we're creating resources that would allow them to think about DEI from the moment they put pen to paper for those who are clinical trialists. So one of the resources that we created that really drives this message home is our toolkit for clinical trial sponsors, which is a practical guide to help trial sponsors weave in DEI principles throughout the entire clinical trial life cycle. So for the remainder of my presentation today, I'll share highlights from this toolkit. I'll highlight other tactical resources that ASH is developing to really help inform the DEI and clinical trials discussion throughout those who are involved in the clinical trial ecosystem, and conclude with how this translates specifically to the sickle cell community. Next slide, please. So for the next couple of slides, I would really sort of, highlight the captions from the toolkit. I know these slides are going to be quite dense with text, but I think if these slides are going to be shared earlier after this meeting, I'm sure you'll find them helpful. But it's worth noting that the common thread across our entire toolkit was the fact that lived experience experts need to be engaged throughout the entire clinical trial lifecycle. In my humble opinion, that is the foundation. If patients are not involved, it's pointless. So for us, you would see this theme throughout our toolkit. So when formulating the research question, we're strongly encouraging investigators to touch base with lived experience experts and get their perspectives on the research question and whether or not they believe that study is going to have implications on them. We believe that lived experience experts are really experts in their disease, whether it be the patient themselves or their caregivers. So they have valuable insights to share. They know where the shoe hurts, they know where it pinches, so definitely getting their perspective is extremely important. We're also encouraging our investigators to engage the healthcare practitioners as well. Most patients hear about clinical trials from their community physician, so how can we engage them in the dialogue? We're asking the investigators to really think very thoughtfully about the epidemiology of the disease. What's the demographic that's impacted, of patients that are impacted by that disease, and how can that inform the trial sites where you actually set up your study? Next slide, please. On the subject of trial design, we're really asking that the investigator think very thoughtfully about their eligibility criteria. I think anecdotally what we've found is that investigators tend to sort of do what I call rinse and repeat. They take a clinical trial protocol with inclusion and exclusion criteria from a past study and may have worked well, and that's not a problem, but then you just pretty much take that inclusion and exclusion criteria and implement it for a new study without giving some thought to how is that going to impact the study population I'm trying to recruit. So we're really asking our investigators to think very thoughtfully about the inclusion and exclusion criteria and ensuring that each study has eligibility criteria that will ensure that the right patient is selected and the right number of patients are involved in the study. We're also encouraging that our investigators think about developing consent forms that are easy to read and that they build in a plan in their trial design process to meet the patients where they are. It's not okay for investigators to expect that patients will schlep to the trial sites, when they may have debilitating conditions. So how do you think about meeting them in areas where they cannot actually come to the trial site? Next slide, please. On the subject of budget, I think it's simple. We're asking our investigators to build ample funds in their budgets to cover the cost of patient participation. We all know that there are hidden costs oftentimes that patients have to incur for the sake of participating in a trial. So how do we think about making sure that those patients are compensated accordingly for their participation? And I mentioned at the very beginning that, the investigators should be engaging key lived experience experts in their studies when they're formulating their research question. Well, if you're going to have a lived experience expert that's a key part of you designing your study, include that person as a key personnel in your grant and compensate them accordingly for their time because they are a colleague and they are a partner in ensuring that your study is successful. Next slide, please. With regards to ethics and other review, we're encouraging our investigators to draft protocols that make a compelling case so that it goes through the IRB approval process seamlessly. We really encourage them to include data in their protocols that speaks to how their study might impact specific subgroups and why it is important that they are targeting the demographic that they are. And also engaging with regulators frequently and often, because if you start talking with regulatory bodies early and getting them to see what you're thinking about when you're thinking about your study design, it facilitates that process. We know that IRBs, institutional review boards, have a key role to play in this effort, and I'll cover that in a subsequent slide later down the line. Next slide, please. With regards to study conduct, we're encouraging investigators to engage a diverse trial workforce and even offering cultural competency training. People sometimes have their own implicit biases, so we really want to make sure that the nurses, the clinical care team is really equipped to work with patients in a thoughtful manner. So having people that look like the patient community that will be participating in the trial is important, but also training people to know how to engage with patients. One of the sessions I attended yesterday, the patient mentioned the importance of listening. That is just a crucial part of being able to train people to be culturally competent. Engaging lived experience experts in the advocacy and recruitment effort is also key, because if you have those individuals whom you've engaged from the very beginning about your trial, they know exactly what you're hoping to attain. They can be the spokespeople to say, hey, I learned about this trial, I know the ins and outs, and if you participate, it will benefit our community. So leveraging them and ensuring that we're getting the word out. And setting up trial sites in locations that will really maximize the desired demographic that you hope for the trial. And again, meeting the patients where they are. Next slide, please. On the subject of analysis and reports, we're really encouraging that investigators disseminate the results of their study, not just to the people who participated in the study, but to the broader community, and disseminating those results in a language that they can understand. So building in plain language summaries that will really help people understand why the study matters to them, or why the results of that study matters to them. And collecting feedback from the people who participated in the trial. That information will be crucial if you do decide to advance that study even further. So getting that feedback is extremely important. And certainly a key element here is really acknowledging the patients and their families for their contribution to making the results or that study come to fruition. Next slide, please. So I talked earlier about the fact that, we've developed this toolkit, but we're also thinking about other practical ways to really implement this. And one of the things we're doing is really trying to think about how can we educate the next generation of clinical trialists so they're really thinking thoughtfully about DEI. It becomes the fabric of, sort of their existence, if you will, as they're developing as clinical trialists. And one way we're doing this is actually embedding our DEI toolkit as part of the curriculum for our Clinical Research Training Institute. This is a program that trains early career investigators who are exploring becoming clinical trialists in hematology to really think through how to design studies thoughtfully. So weaving this toolkit as part of their curriculum is helpful to them. We're also ensuring that we're training the faculty who will be teaching these investigators about how to weave in this sort of concept in their teaching ability as well. We also know that this is sort of a different kind of learning. I always coin the phrase, in the DEI and clinical trials world, we're building the plane as we're flying it. Some people perhaps know how to put some parts together better than others. So we really want to create a learning ecosystem that will foster peer-to-peer interaction, where people can sort of learn from each other about, well, what did you do well that worked in another trial that I could potentially learn from? So fostering that knowledge exchange, but also creating an environment where people can find resources easily and learn and use that information to develop their trials. And I think the most important part of our learning ecosystem as we're thinking about framing this is really offering a consultative service to investigators where they can have their protocols critiqued by lived experience experts and have the patients provide feedback to them on, this is how this study, you need to look at the study differently because this is how it might impact me. I may not show up to that trial even though you think it's pristine and all. So really offering the investigators a different perspective so that they design their trials in a manner that will really engage the patient community. I talked about IRBs before. One of the things that we're thinking about doing is really ensuring that we're holding the IRBs accountable for the foundation that they're built on, which is justice. One of the principles of the existence of IRBs is to ensure that they're upholding the justice principle. And for the most part, they have held on to the safety and efficacy part of their role, which is important, but the justice and fairness part is just as important. So what we would like to do on the ASH end, and we're actually working on that now, is developing a sign-on letter that will really go out to the accrediting body of IRBs, specifically stating things like having the IRB accrediting body update their guidelines to include stipulations that speak to DEI specifically. So an example of that is we're asking AHARP, which is the accrediting body in the US for IRBs, basically asking them that they should update their guidelines to include language that says any institution that is submitting a request for an IRB or a renewal, that they include a diversity action plan for their board. We know that having a diverse board representation, having a diverse board that looks like the people who may participate in that trial, lends itself to a different perspective for those who participate. So that's just one example. There are several others that we plan to include in our language around what constitutes a coercive budget. Like when the IRBs say, don't put in so much money in the budget that could potentially be coercive or cause undue influence, what does that really mean, especially when the investigator themselves has to account for compensating patients for their time? So we're really hoping that these little steps will really try to make a difference for the field. So what does this all mean for sickle cell disease? From my perspective, I think what we're trying to do and what we're encouraging sickle cell disease investigators is to ask that they begin thinking about engaging lived experience experts early and often. It is crucial. We're asking that they're thoughtful about their inclusion and exclusion criteria. Many sickle cell disease patients have comorbidities, and we need to start designing trials that are reflective of the real world. So if you design a pristine trial that may lead to a therapeutic, and you only selected certain patients who don't have X or Y comorbidity, when that therapeutic goes out to the market, is it going to apply to everyone? And so this is what we want investigators to think about. And then we're also asking that they engage with the primary care providers for these patients because they'll hear about trials from these individuals. And my last slide here, next slide please, is just a slide to highlight for you all a new resource that ASH is hoping to launch in September. And this is our research priorities. And we hope that this is a document that would really set the stage for future research in sickle cell to come. This draft document is open for public comment. We are engaging comments not just from researchers, practitioners, but also patients. Because again, going back to what I said earlier, all of these research questions are hopefully going to apply to the community that we're trying to serve. Public comment is open until August 28th, and we're hoping to launch the final document in September to coincide with Sickle Cell Awareness Month. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kuaban. Now we'll have our final speaker of the session. We have Terry Hawrysh, who has written, he's a graduate of the College of Lived Experience and Clinical Trials Ontario representative. He's a cancer survivor and advocates for a healthcare system with excellent patient outcomes. Following his diagnosis, he delved into clinical research, becoming involved in cancer research programs as a patient partner and advisor. He collaborates with various institutions applying his experiences to shape research for cancer patient needs. As vice chair of the Ontario Institute of Cancer Research Patient Family Advisory Committee, he promotes patient engagement in translational research programs. Additionally, he serves on the CADITH CDOR Expert Review Committee and advises organizations like Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and the Leukemia Lymphoma Society of Canada. He has a master's in engineering and professional engineer designation, and he contributes his expertise in improving healthcare systems. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Dr. Williams. And technology fails me yet again because I'm out of juice. Temporarily. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to thank the previous two speakers. Those talks are absolutely just so bang on. Being a patient partner for in clinical research for I don't know, about 5 or 6 years, I have learned all that the hard way, bit by bit by bit. It's so nice to see it so aptly summarized by these two speakers. So congratulations on some excellent talks there. I'm going to be speaking on something a little bit different. And again, if you just, there we go. There we go. Okay. Boy, you got a lot of patience with me. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to be speaking of diversity. I'm going to be speaking about something a little bit different. And the title of my talk today is Patient and Public Perceptions in Canada about Decentralized and Hybrid Clinical Trials. It's all about time we bring trials to people. And so the covered in this presentation today, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about clinical trials in Ontario and the College of Lived Experience, which I belong to, and a little bit about what decentralized and hybrid trials are, and how this project came about. And there's really two stories in there in terms of how this project came about. You know, it's how patients and the public are critical to generating the idea. We're critical to generating the idea for this work and in carrying it out, and the work itself, which leads to the next point about our survey that we designed and executed on decentralized and hybrid clinical trials, and some highlights of the survey results and some discussion. And then we'll finish it off with a summary and a call to action. Oops. Let's see. Okay, there we are. Yeah, so a little bit about Clinical Trials Ontario. Clinical Trials Ontario is primarily funded by Ontario's Ministry of College and Universities. Clinical Trial Ontario's vision and mission is essentially, it's been created to help improve the environment in Ontario for clinical trials. And Clinical Trials Ontario has 3 strategic pillars that we operate under. One is to streamline, and that is to really help streamline existing processes to help make things more efficient and cost-effective without compromising the quality of the clinical trial, and to engage patients and public with clinical trials. And engage is a very purposeful phrase, and it can mean to engage as clinical trial participants, but also mean to engage as research collaborators with clinical trial teams. And overall, Clinical Trials Ontario wants to engage people in conversations about clinical trials and to increase the awareness about clinical trials. And also to help promote high-quality research teams and infrastructure that are in Ontario, and that conduct world-class clinical trials. And this inevitably helps attract industry to Ontario to do clinical trials and helps Ontarians have access to more therapies in health. So the College of Lived Experience, so it's a big part of what Clinical Trials Ontario does, especially under its Engage strategic pillar. And it's work that's informed by a group called the College of Lived Experience, which I'm part of, which is a patient public group whose members are interested in clinical trials, and some have participated themselves or have cared for somebody who has, or just simply being interested in clinical trials. So the survey I'm going to be talking about was co-produced from start to end, including the development of this presentation by members of the college who wish to be involved in the project. So the college is essentially, we are is 24 members. We come from a wide range of experiences with clinical trials as participants or in clinical trials or patient partners in the research. We come from all over Ontario. We're quite a demographically diverse group, range of ages, and patients and caregivers from different disease and conditions, from rare conditions to more common diseases and daily diseases such as cancer. What do? We advise CTO on projects, and we advise CTO partners on projects, and we mentor each other with respect to opportunities outside the college. So everybody's on the same page. This is what these terms mean. Decentralized trials is taken from a definition from Health Canada, and trials are done where study participants basically don't go to a central site for all their trial procedures, while hybrid trials might have some parts where participants go to a main site for some things, and then other parts where they don't have to visit a main site. And the Health Canada reference for these terms is at the bottom there. So this is our study, boiled down to a QR code and also a link there on the bottom. So our study aimed to assess the attitudes of potential participants towards decentralized and hybrid clinical trials, to explore associations with gender, age, health status, geography, ethnicity, and prior clinical trial participation. So a little bit of context here. In the past a decade or so, there's been a lot of discussion in the clinical research community about creating and delivering clinical trials that are more patient-centric, including designing and conducting clinical trials that are decentralized or hybrid in nature. But based on a literature review done by study co-investigators, the perceptions and attitudes of potential clinical trial participants remains severely underreported in Canada, if reported at all. And so at CTO, Clinical Trials Ontario, along with co-investigators at Queen's University, we felt that this missing perspective should be further explored. So for all you people that love methods, just briefly touch on the methods here. So the survey itself was a descriptive cross-sectional self-reported open survey. It was composed of two sections, first being 39 questions covering attitudes and preference about participating in centralized and decentralized clinical trials, questions about health status and demographics, and Another part, an optional part, composed of 42 questions covering issues related to informed consent, trial-related travel, data collection, keeping a patient diary, home delivery of study materials, and accessibility. And we did have this survey approved by the Queen's University Health Research Ethics Board. So we have some co-investigators that are affiliated with Queen's University. So it's a very convenient path. And we shared the survey on social media and disseminated it on social media, and essentially tried to target health charities and patient organizations, and also the general public. And it was open between September and December of 2022. And the questions in both sections included different response options, such as a 5-point Likert scale, multiple choice questions, ranked or open-ended text, and each section was designed to take approximately 10 minutes to do. So this slide talks about working with the college and the methods that were supported and mobilized in the study. And just briefly here, the whole ideation aspect of developing a survey to measure, the general public's understanding and perspectives was started with members in the college, and grew into this, the development of the survey, which was very well supported by a CTO in many aspects. The college team focused on developing the survey, testing the survey, sharing the survey, analyzing survey results, and weighting and publishing a manuscript. And a great example of collaboration between two parties, and which really generated a very patient-oriented and patient-relevant survey. So what we found regarding demographics, so we had 325 people that consented to participate, 23 in French language, 248 people completed section 1, the mandatory section, and 169 completed the optional one. Average age was 51, gender, women, 77%, men, 21% responded, gender fluid, non-binary, two-spirit, less than 2%. And education, highly educated, 49%, university graduate, postgraduate professionals, mostly white, Caucasian, 85%, mostly working full-time, 45%, living in Ontario and Quebec, 68%, and urban, 92%, and rural, 8%, only 8%. And there was 35% living with one chronic condition, 35% had a life-threatening illness. So here's, from an open text response, this was a very salient quote that we pulled out. These quotes are, I've sprinkled a few quotes in here, they're all very meaningful. It's about time that we bring clinical trials to people. As somebody with many health issues, I already have a lot on my plate, and more needs to be done to make participation in clinical trials simple and easy to access. So what we found from the perspective of knowledge, preferences, and perceptions about clinical trials, 40% had participated in the trial already. 29% had cared for somebody or who participated in a trial. 79% feel informed or very informed about clinical trials. 78% felt it very or extremely important to be provided with options for study visits. And a couple of other interesting responses, but not shown here. There was a lower preference. Only 23% wanted to have study visits at the study clinic and in person. 79% showed preference to having some study visits at home and some at the clinic. And 50% were evenly split on a preference for health data collected at home via video only. Another interesting open text quote, pandemic forced us to innovate in order to adapt to restrictions on in-person visits. I worry these gains will be lost over time as people slip back into the status quo. And yes, the pandemic certainly changed a lot of philosophy in terms of how clinical trials are executed. So what we found regarding informed consent, consent can be a potential ethical challenge, and should it be done outside of a study center via technology? But here's what people told us in the survey. 85% had a moderate to great deal of preference to providing informed consent at a satellite site closer to home rather than the main study site. And 80% had moderate to great deal of preference using technology or video to provide informed consent. 61% had a moderate to great deal of preference using the phone, and everybody was split on privacy. So, when asked further questions related to providing informed consent via phone or a teleconference, and most indicated an overall low level of concern. However, when asked how concerned they were about privacy, it was 50% of the respondents were at least slightly concerned. So, the responses continue to follow a theme related to a preference for providing options, and most preferring video conference or in-person at satellite sites closer to home, while the fewest preferring in-person at the study sites. And the responses are, generally reflective of how society has become, accustomed to virtual methods of interacting and communicating through the pandemic. So another salient quote, sites need better support and infrastructure to go to remote-based studies, and REB, our Research Ethics Board, support as well to allow consent process flexibility. Enough said there. So what we found regarding participation. So we asked to rank what types of communication with the trial team would be most helpful to them. Having one person as a go-to contact was the most highly ranked, followed by access to 24-hour helplines, instruction of what to do in off-hour emergencies, and the ability to send a text message and access an information hub. Our survey respondents also indicated that they may have concerns about handling adverse events and potential complications, which is also aligned with our survey. And nearly 65% of our respondents indicated that they would want site travel time to be less than 1 hour. Some factors impacting whether length and time of travel is tolerable includes the frequency of the visits that they would experience, the travel costs associated with it, time involved, and the overall inconvenience of travel. And 72% like routine and simple tests being done close to home, things like basic imaging and blood draws, at your Life Labs or Dynacare. So another quote, access to clinical trials, especially for those who live outside of major urban centers, extremely important. And so What we found regarding data collection, patient diaries, just some quick stats here. 59% were not concerned about providing information via technology. 43% at least somewhat concerned about third parties accessing records, and 40% at least somewhat concerned about the privacy of shared data. And there was a clear preference for typed or voice data for, on an app for a patient diary. And for those who preferred tech options, 90% wanted clear instructions and 72% wanted access to IT support. Top concerns about delivery of investigational product to home were having clear instructions and clear information on the time frame, delivery, and how to store the products. Last quote, I promise. This decentralized or hybrid trials would be a great option for people with restricted mobility or for those who have limited transportation options. So potential benefits, for individual participants, overwhelming majority thought that it'd be easier to participate overall in decentralized hybrid trials. 75% thought that these types of trials would provide good flexibility, and 56% thought, it required less time investment, and 56% thought that the out-of-pocket costs would be less. For trials as a whole, and very, very important points here, 91% thought these trials can improve accessibility for people, all people in Canada, and 85% thought it could potentially increase the diversity of clinical trials in Canada as well. So for all the trialists who design, for all the folks out there who are policymakers, these are very, very important points to factor into decisions that they make. Of course, with all studies, there's limitations to the work that's been done, and yes, respondents may not be representative, given that many of them have participated in trials already and may be somewhat biased, and we're predominantly white, upper middle class women, and mostly from urban locations. People heard about the survey a lot of people heard about the survey from Clinical Trials Ontario, and may already be in the know about clinical trials or have experience as patient partners or participation in the trial. People needed an internet connection, and those who are financially disadvantaged or in rural sites may not have that benefit. And our study was approved by an REB, but some REBs wouldn't allow it to be shared as they had not reviewed it themselves. So that was a little bit of an impediment to getting larger numbers in the survey. So calls to action. This slide here shows various stakeholders on the left and some call to actions on the right. We're asking people to take these survey results into account as they do their own work related to clinical trials, especially those conducting trials that are, and those that create policies and regulations related to clinical trials in Canada and beyond. And also very importantly, to encourage patients and patient groups to become patient partners in clinical research. And we've heard that in the previous two talks, how important that is, and especially early in the research cycle. And it's important that their needs be recognized, again, early as possible in the clinical trial. So in summary, here's really the main takeaways to the presentation. So we gathered what we believe to be the first findings related to perceptions and perspectives on decentralized clinical trials and hybrid clinical trials based on a survey of people in Canada. We're asking people to be open to the idea of offering options for decentralized and hybrid clinical trials. As respondents to the survey, in a large portion, have indicated that they see a number of potential benefits to participating. For example, less time, more flexibility, easier to participate, and less costs, less out-of-pocket costs. And overall, people would like options to participate in trials that are decentralized, or at least have some decentralized elements, as they perceive this approach to clinical trials offers personal benefits, and in general, I think definitely helps with accrual and retention in clinical trials. And also of importance, the survey was informed and developed by patients with lived experience and chronic diseases that are motivated to elevate impactful improvements in clinical trial design and operations with the clinical trial, with the patient and user in mind. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And any questions, we'll address later. Thank you.
We can just invite the speakers to go back up on the stage, and then Dr. Williams, if you want to just moderate the question and answer period, that'd be fantastic. Myself and my colleague will have perfect. I see our first question in the right-hand side. Give me 1 second.
Hello, Edward Ivy. I just have a couple of questions. It's for the last speaker. And I'm just going to ask the 3 questions if the audience doesn't mind. One, did you use community health workers in either administering the survey, or did you ask about using community health workers, community health advocates in expanding clinical trials, particularly the rural areas? Secondly, did your clinical trials engage like primary care providers to be those non-research center sites, or was it mainly just using community resources like LabQuest and so forth? And then lastly, I know you said 35% had chronic disease. Was that chronic disease, like, did it include the more common chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, or did it just include like cancer and other more non-common chronic diseases?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I'll hopefully I've remembered them all. but I'll start with the last one and work backwards. Yes, indeed, the survey disease demographic, if you like to call it that, really encapsulated a wide range of ailments, and anything from manageable chronic diseases to severe diseases like cancer, to mental health. So we had a pretty good, broad spectrum of response regarding disease. In terms of primary care physicians, we did not have primary care physician responses. The surveys weren't designed that way. They're really designed to focus on patient stakeholder responses. And that's really what we targeted. So it would have been interesting, definitely, to hear the thoughts of primary care physicians and other support staff. That will be a separate survey, definitely. And the first question about community health records?
Community health workers or patient navigators support.
No, that's really not an aspect that we drilled down on. although that's a very interesting topic. If I'm reading your question the right way, but unfortunately, we really didn't have that visibility when we drilled down into our survey results.
Yeah, I guess and just to clarify, so I know in the U.S. some of the clinical trials are starting to use community health workers as well as other providers. So I don't know if in Canada you have physician assistants, for example, or nurse practitioners, using them in the research setting as well as the PIs, primary investigators.
Well, in decentralized and hybrid clinical trials, yes, absolutely. We have quite a spectrum of involvement from nurse practitioners, maybe not so much nurse practitioners, but home care nurse staff that are very, very well educated in terms of being able to how to administer tests, how to assess patients correctly, how to coach patients on wearable technologies as well to do remote monitoring, all those things. But the principal investigators essentially, they're at the main site, and but it's still a very close collaboration between the different parties there. Yeah.
We have one question here, and then we'll go to you, Riyadh.
Thank you, all of you three. I really enjoyed your presentation. This is for Terry with regards to the clinical trials and the College of Lived Experience. How do you become a member for those of us who are interested?
Sorry, how do
we become a member of the College of Lived Experience?
Yeah.
'Cause I went through the website and it showed the list of members,
Yep.
but it doesn't show like the eligibility or the requirements to even apply. So how could, if we are interested in being Lived Experience members, how could we apply and be one of them, those members?
Yeah, that is a challenge, by the way, for Clinical Trials Ontario to find people, believe it or not. And we know there's a lot of motivated people out there that want to contribute, but finding them and connecting is difficult. But typically, we use social media primarily as a vehicle, and we try to connect with patient organizations as well as best we can, and disseminate the opportunities through there. We have a call that occurs about every year or so to replenish our staff of college participants, and so that's basically the way we do it. And we really strive as hard as we can to really have a diverse makeup as possible in the college. I do know that we go through a lot of angst to really balance things because as we've heard, diversity in clinical trials is so important, and it has to reflect the demographic to be meaningful. So we try to work as hard as we can in that aspect. So that's kind of our approach.
Thank you. This question is for all three panelists, and also would like to get the perspective from Dr. Williams. We've come a long way on patient engagement on clinical trials. Are we where we ought to be or need to be? And why? What is still missing? I'd like to get the three different perspectives and then the clinicians from Dr. Williams. Thank you.
Lance, kick us off.
I think it's for everybody.
We'll go in the order of the speakers, make it easy for you.
Okay, all right.
That means you, brother.
I'm not mic'd up, so I'll have to come to the podium. Are you asking if we are where we need to be? Yeah. Right. No, I do believe that barriers still exist, and despite having come far away in having this conversation, for sure, it's a step in the right direction, but there are so many other elements to consider, including what it truly means to have equity and diversity involved and inclusion. So we're not there yet, but having this conversation is a step in the right direction for sure.
I would second that. I don't think we are where we need to be, but we're certainly making great strides to be better. I think having conversations like the ones we're having now is important. But I was sharing with a couple of my colleagues on my table there is, in this room, we've all drunk the DEI Kool-Aid. So, we're preaching really to the congregation, but I think we need to take it one step further and have conversations with people who have not drunk that Kool-Aid, because there are people with different opinions, at least even in the research sphere, who don't think this is relevant, who don't think this is important. So how do you change that person's perspective in a thoughtful way so that they can think about the value that having diverse representation in studies will mean to drug development?
Yeah, if I...
Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet, but yes, I agree that we've made great strides in the past, say, 5 years or so. I personally would like to see more patient engagement at a governance level in research institutions, industry, where you can really make maybe a more impactful change and influence in terms of helping to shape not just research studies, but programs that maybe have been too focused in the past on just the clinical aspect versus the introduction of important aspects like EDI, getting that patient voice involved as early as possible in the design of research studies and the operation of research studies. We're kind of getting there. At the work that I do at Ontario Institute of Cancer Research, just as an example of one of the things that we're starting to do is have all the new all new research studies that are being applied for. Part of the prerequisite is for them to, along with their application or in their application, have a EDI plan and also a patient partner plan. And your application doesn't go anywhere until that is built in to your research study. So that's getting it like early in the game, that recognition built in, so that the more patient-centric research flows out of it that meets outcomes and experiences that patients are looking for. So we're getting there.
I would concur. I think we have sure come a long way, but we definitely are not where we need to be. And it actually ties to a question I had for Lance, which was, he mentioned several times this bottom-up approach in terms of incorporating patient perspectives into the research. And for me, I think what is largely missing is that that's often a reaction or a response. So an investigator comes up with a study, or a company comes up with a study, and then they get patient engagement to better delineate things, or we apply an EDI lens to it. But I think what's missing is actually having the patient bodies generate the questions, like what's actually important to you, and then have the other people come in and the other layers. And I think that part is still missing. It's not quite as well developed, and I'm not sure how to best do that. It was a question I was going to pose to Lance as well, because I think that bottom-up approach is so key, but that has to drive the agenda as well. That's what I would add.
So we maybe have time for one more question before we go to break. Oh, perfect timing.
Thanks. Just a comment and then a question for Alice. I think until we put our money where our mouth is, this isn't going to happen. It's really hard. We have to have the resources and the time to do it well. Until now, that hasn't been provided. Having been involved in a number of research studies, you know, we want to expedite things. We have a tight budget, and this is hard. Anyway, we're coming along. My question to Alice is, in the publication that your organization is putting out in September, do the priorities for sickle cell research reflect researchers' priorities, or are there patients involved?
We did certainly take the patient perspective into account, so it does include that. And we are also soliciting additional input at this point to ensure that, you know, we're not missing anything. The first iteration of the research priorities, I believe, actually had a patient section, but it's been structured a little bit differently this time around to ensure we're, you know, looking at it from, I think there's a section on pain, for instance, and weaving in not just the researcher point of view, but also the patient point of view. So it does capture both sides, if you will.
Thank you.
We're finished for questions, Delaney, or?
Exactly. Time for a 10-minute break.
Thanks, everybody.
As you can see, my brother right here. No, it's timely. Stretch break, bio break. Please help yourself to some tea, water, beverages. We blew past our time mark. We were supposed to be done at 11:20, but it's all good. We're here to have a good time, right? So with that being said, we'll reconvene here